So I have asked these ladies to come and share with us this morning and help answer some of these questions. These are three of our small group leaders. One of them might be your small group leader. And they've been around Bloom for a long time. They are all in varying stages of motherhood with varying ages of kids. And so I thought that they would be great for you to hear from this morning. So I'd like to start and have each of you just kind of briefly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you. So Kimberly, we'll start with you.
Okay, yeah. Hi, girls. I'm Kimberly PRUITT. I'm the older person up here. Oh, and there's my family. Let's see, I've been married for 34 years to Tad. Known him since I was 11. He moved in across the street from my best friend before we started 7th grade. So we go way back. He's up at the top, the old one with the bald head. And then I've got 4 kids of my own. My baby is in front and center, Ivy, and she's 24. And then the next blonde to her is Emma, and she's 25 and married to Will behind her. And then the brunette in the red or orange in the middle is Lillian. She's 26, and she's married to Tucker, who has his COVID mustache. And then my son is standing right in front of me, Wes. He's 29, and his sweet wife, my daughter-in-law, Mary Beth, is in front of him. And did I forget anything? I told you how long I'd been married. Yeah, and I did, this used to be called Moms and More, so when I had those 4 little babies, I loved Moms and More, and it was a sad day when somebody was sick and I didn't get to come. And then I've led in Moms and More for a number of years, small groups, and in Bloom, I think this is my 4th year maybe doing
Yeah,
Bloom.
You've been around here quite a while.
Yeah, I've been around, so.
Yeah. All right, Mandy?
Hey, I'm Mandy Hauk, and there's my people. I am married to Chris, and we've been married for, I think, 11 years, around there. And those are my 2 little boys. Will is 7, and Graham is 5, and they're great. So.
Awesome. I love that picture. So cute. Shows their personalities. Emily?
Yes. Hi, I'm Emily SHEAFFER. I'm married to Dan. This was taken last week, and we did not bribe our one son well enough to smile at his picture. So,
Not for lack of trying, right?
Yeah. So Dan and I have been married for 13 years. My oldest daughter, Hayden, is 10. Isaac, the one not smiling, is 8. Jared is 7, and Evelyn is 4. And fun fact, Mandy and I were in the very first Bloom group together back in 2013. Yeah. So Bloom has been absolutely just so influential for me, and I can speak for both of us, for us.
You can speak for me.
Awesome. Well, Dan is on staff here, and he's part of our team, and so it's been fun for me to get to know them from the other side, because usually I know one half of the couple, and it's been fun for me to get to know Dan as well. So we have some questions that we're just going to ask and go through here this morning and hear from these ladies. And so here's the first one. What are some of your top tips to foster obedience in kind of that 2 to 3-year-old toddler stage? It's hard, kind of crazy. So Mandy, what do you think?
Okay, I had to, rewind a little bit because my boys are a little bit older. But I will say, as I was thinking about it, like Emily said, we were in the same Bloom group, and Will was months old, and Isaac was about a year. And when I pictured, trying to remember 2 and 3, that age, I picture Emily and the other, Becca and the other Melody, other girls in my group, and Star, and like that's who got me through, obviously them drawing me to the Lord, them crying with me, them encouraging me and challenging me. So any tips that I have probably came from Emily. So one thing that I thought of initially was just the idea of why am I doing this hard thing of teaching them to obey? It makes them sad. It makes me sad. It is so hard to follow through. And so I actually remembered a conversation that I had with Emily where I was just like, I'm losing it. What is this for? And she just told me this very simple idea or this truth that we're teaching them to obey us so that later they can obey God. And for me, it was like, okay, it's not just my will over theirs. It's not just making them look good so that I can look good. It's teaching them to follow God the way that I want to, and teaching them to love God's discipline. So that was really, really helpful for me.
Yeah, I think starting with the big picture is a huge thing. Reminding ourselves and even our kids of the why behind what we're doing, right? So one of the things that we talk about in Bloom when we talk about discipline is teach, train, correct. And all of you kind of had a similar theme in your answers on this, talking about our kids need to know what we're expecting from them. So, Emily, talk to us a little bit about what that looks like with little ones.
Yeah. I think the stage is so fun, but it can be really challenging just depending on the verbal skill level of your child to really know, like, are they understanding what I'm communicating to them? And just knowing, like, what to expect from them. Although I think that they are often more capable than what we give them credit for. I certainly have not gotten this right. So I just want to make sure that you all know that it's easy to kind of type all of these answers up, but please know there's been a lot of error and redos on my part. But just to remember that first and foremost, you're not just trying to correct behavior, that it really is about your child's heart, and you want to shepherd your child's heart to be more like Christ. And so that means you're going to have to look beyond just their behavior and try to draw out questions that will reveal what's going on. And that is really hard at age 2 and 3, but I think it's also just you yourself practicing. Like, you get to practice on your kids for a little while. And so as they get older, you'll be better prepared to ask those questions. Second, also just asking the question, like, why did you do that? That's probably a really unreasonable ask. Like, they're just not going to know why. They can't answer that, which I know that. I still ask that question, and I still want them to give me an answer. But also at this age, that's when I started talking about feelings and emotions, and we would use just really basic feelings charts just so that they could help identify what they were feeling, and then, you know, if they had hit their sibling or yelled at somebody, then they could also try to see it from that other person's perspective. And so that was just a really easy way to start those questions, thinking about other people. And then, just like you said, Carrie, talking about modeling and training and just role playing. If I just simply told my child to stop acting a certain way, but failed to teach them how to act, then I was just setting them up for failure. And I'm reminded in Ephesians 4, it talks about like putting off the old self and then putting on the new self with righteous behavior to look more like Christ. And so this would look a lot like instead of after an incident, then training them, practicing with them what to say, what to do, how to speak kindly, how to show love, and just going over and over what to do. And then ultimately, just don't give up. Just put in the hard work now. It's exhausting, it's time-consuming, but this season won't last, and this is such a foundational time for them to learn obedience that you'll definitely be thankful that you put in the time now, because it will just get a little bit more complicated later, I think.
Yeah, it definitely pays off. So I think that instruction phase at that 2 and 3-year-old age is maybe sometimes where we either skip over or don't spend enough time because we're constantly having to say no. We're constantly having to redirect. We're constantly having to, pull them off of the dog or their sibling or the toilet paper roll or the Kleenex box or whatever it is they're destroying. And so talk a little bit more, maybe Kimberly, about how important instruction is in that phase. And when we talk about like even just that teach, train, correct model how much teaching goes in to this phase in order to cultivate obedience.
Yeah. Yes, it's the work of motherhood for sure. And just when I think about that question, the whole instruction thing, and again, I'm speaking from my failures, and I think that instruction we can find ourselves not instructing and being more of commanding, and our days being way too full of, no, stop it, don't do that. And that's not instruction. That is just commanding, and it's not necessarily, except for right in the moment, beneficial. And so just remembering, okay, God instructs me. He uses his word and his spirit to instruct me. And so that's what I need. I did follow the don't do that. With that stick, you might hurt somebody and poke your sister in the eye. So that wasn't that hard to just finish out the instruction so that they know why you're telling them to don't or to stop. And that sounds really basic and concrete, but again, like you, Mandy, I learned, and I tell my girls in my group, anything good I learned about parenting and being a mom, I'm sure that the Lord used my friends and Moms and More and Bloom to do it. So I'm super, super thankful for my friends, and I still am. But so that training piece, and then again, I've read God's word for years and years, and I still sometimes choose to not obey, and he is wonderfully gracious to me to remind me through his spirit in me or through his word, you got that wrong. And he's gracious to teach me using my friends or pastor or whatever that this is actually the right way to do that, the right heart to have about this. And then when I still choose to disobey, he's also gracious enough to let me experience a consequence of that behavior. And so that we want to emulate how God is with us, with our children. And so after we've instructed, and then we've practiced and literally practiced. Now here's how I want you to play with that stick. Here's a way you can play with that stick so that it's not dangerous to your siblings that are around you. And then you show them, and then, here, let me let you practice. Literally let them practice. And then if they choose to still disobey, then you give an appropriate consequence. And if it's good enough for the Lord to use that with us, then it's certainly good enough for us to do that with our children and just persevere.
Yeah, I think that's great. I want to kind of spend a little more time there on sort of that process, because these are all amazing principles for a lot of ages. So I want to go back just a little bit to you, Mandy, specifically like in that 2 to 3 year old phase, when you've got to keep your language really concise. You've got to, you can't give a lecture about why we behave like we, a certain way and a lot of words. And so you kind of had a pattern of discussing things ahead of time.
Yes.
Having
Yes.
clear consequences and positive reinforcement after the fact. So talk just a little bit about what that might look like practically.
Yeah, I'm laughing because we still do that. Like, they're that old, and that's, yeah. So yeah, my mother-in-law and my mom actually both gave me this great hint of, you need to talk about a situation before it happens. So if you're going into a store, even as little as 2 and 3, we would, in the car, let's talk about what's going to happen. Okay, we're going into a store. Is it okay for you to yell? No. And then we might talk about why, to be respectful of others. Is it okay for you to grab things off the shelf? No. What are you supposed to do when we go in? We're supposed to listen and stay by you, or whatever it is. So we kind of rehearse the procedure. When we're in the store, then we can refer back to that. Remember, we talked about it is not okay to yell in a store, or whatever the instruction is. And then afterward, we get back in the car, we can reflect on that. Today, did we do everything to the best that we could? Did you yell a little? Whatever it was. Not to say that my kids just yell all the time. They really don't.
But we know they're boys, so
But they
yes,
totally
there's
do.
a lot of yelling.
They're just loud. I don't know where they get it. But also the idea, of positive reinforcement. I think I saw the beauty of this teaching middle school for a number of years. There's so many things that you can find that they do wrong. But man, when you find that one thing that they do well, you can see them come alive. And especially if they do something well that you really have been working on. Like, babe, I saw you share with your brother today, and, no one was telling you to do that. That's awesome. I can see how much you love him. That makes him feel loved when you share with him. That goes a long way with me, too, with everyone. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The last thing that that somebody brought up when we were talking about this is at that toddler stage, you're really training them to obey quickly for safety reasons. If they run out in the street and you say stop, like, you want them to stop right then. You don't want to have a discussion with them of why and all those kinds of things to convince them to stop. You want them to obey immediately. And so even training that at 2 and 3 in a fun way with a game or, kind of that red light, what I would call red light, green light, but maybe just make it stop and go. Little things like that where it's a game at a moment that doesn't matter, but you're actually just training that reflex of when they hear the word stop, they stop. And so I think that's another important thing to do at that age. I've got a friend who, this was when his kids were older, but he had this whistle that he did. And we had a whole bunch of families outside at this big picnic one day, and he was ready to go. And he did this whistle, and I mean, these 3 heads spread all over the place, just whipped around. And I was like, can you teach that? Like, you need to offer classes and charge a lot of money to teach that, because he had just trained his kids to automatically respond. And so I think that's something else that you can do in that toddler stage, is do it in a fun way, but teach almost a reflexive obedience to commands. Okay, let's take it a little step further, and how do you, whether it's toddler or older, how do you discipline a kid who doesn't really care about discipline? You give a consequence, and they're kind of like, yeah, okay, fine, whatever, I don't care. Spanking doesn't seem to work. Timeout doesn't seem to work for younger one. Any advice for parenting those kids, for parenting a child who is really strong-willed or just doesn't seem to care? Kimberly, you been there?
I'll let the other girls answer.
Except I know a couple of, I don't know all of your kids, but I had Ivy in FSK when Ivy was like this big, her youngest, and she was like the sweetest angel.
Yeah,
so,
she was
but
not
surely you had
strong-willed.
somebody else who was
I
strong-willed.
had a pistol, yes. So I'll address that question. And one of the best things, again, that someone gave me advice about a strong-willed child, and that to remember that strong-willed child, that one day with appropriate shepherding, that child will be able to be a great leader and influencer of people. So that was so helpful to have a mindset of not, why do I have this or these strong-willed, when they get to go out and eat, their kids just sit right there with them and are just do everything they ask them to do, instead to be able to look at that little pistol of yours and know, okay, she is going to be able to be fearless and courageous and lead well. And so just right now, it's really annoying because it's an immature, I think I wrote myself a little note that they're prematurely confident that they know what's best, because they don't.
Isn't that good? Prematurely confident that they know what's best. Anybody have one of those at your house? Yeah, we even got a hand back there. Yeah, go ahead.
So these courageous little ones, what you want to do is just find an opportunity to let them exercise their strength and courage and confidence, even though it's immature, with giving them choices of things that don't really matter. let them choose which shirts, or let them choose their shoes, let them choose what cereal they're having. I mean, you can still control the options, but let them choose, and if it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. But they get the practice of exercising a little control in life, and they love that. And then even with things that do matter, you can still give them two options of results, things that are okay and safe for them to make a choice in. And again, not that it's going to solve all of their issues of immaturity, but you're letting them exercise this immature strength that they have in ways that are safe and age appropriate.
Yeah, that's really good. Emily, you've got a strong one.
I do. I'm not going to pinpoint
Not
who
gonna
it
name
is,
names?
but he might be the one not smiling in that picture. And I just want to acknowledge, too, that for those who are foster moms or adoptive moms, that this is going to look different for you. My 3 oldest are adopted, and I would just really encourage you to find community, other adoptive moms to rally around you when you just feel really discouraged, because while there's not a formula at all with any child, when you are adopting kids from hard places, it's just going to be different, and you're going to need other people to potentially, a counselor to help you just walk through what layers of trauma is going to look like, and all of the mental and emotional backstories that's just different than biological kids. So, seeking the help of a counselor who's trained in adoption is a really wise thing, and just know that you're just not alone, but it is going to look different. So one of my kids is a little bit more strong-willed than I think all of them put together, and I just remember when he was 3, having to wake up with the mentality that I'm a brick wall, and I'm going to feel like I'm going to be pummeled all day, but I had to remain strong. And ultimately, God called me to parent this child, and so I had to be more strong-willed than him. And that was exhausting. I just wanted peace, And I remember when he was little, and even now, when there's nothing else that I can do, I'll just sometimes take his hands, or we'll just stop and just we just have to pray, because there's nothing else that will change his heart. And he's at the age now where we're able to have conversations about him becoming a Christian and just what it looks like to repent and to believe. But ultimately, I'm praying for God to change his heart, and he knows that he cannot change his heart. Only Jesus can. And so in those moments, it is very freeing for me to know I can just pray to the Lord and he can help give wisdom in this situation, and he's the one that changes his heart, because I can't do it. He knows, my son knows, that he can't change his heart. And so it really is a gospel opportunity, even though it's time-consuming, it's so exhausting. It is just not a quick and easy fix by any means. But ultimately, it does show my child, too, that I don't have all the answers, and that I also am under God's authority. And it doesn't matter how old you get, we're under authority our whole life.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I have a strong one as well. And one of the things that was helpful to me over the years was to remember that I'm disciplining for an offense. I'm not disciplining necessarily to get a reaction. And so sometimes your strong one, especially as they get a little bit older and even into the teenage years, sometimes their "I don't care what you do to me" reaction is kind of their defense mechanism. That's kind of how they react when they are convicted and they know that they've done something wrong. They kind of put up this, well, it's not that big of a deal. I don't care. Go ahead and punish me attitude. And so sometimes you definitely don't want to miss their heart, just like Emily's saying, but you also don't want to just continue to pound and pound and pound. Especially when they get older, you want them to pay the price, but then we need to move on from the offense as well. So don't get caught up in, while you don't want to stop short of obedience, and you do want to consider their heart, there's a fine line between pursuing obedience and pursuing a spirit that's obedient, but then also the verse that tells us not to exasperate our children. And so don't get caught in the trap of looking for a specific response and disciplining until you get there. Because with a strong-willed child, you could be there for a few days or months or weeks looking for that response. So just really, and that takes a lot of prayer, that takes a lot of consideration, that takes a lot of talking things through with your husband and really focusing on obedience and heart and finding that fine line there. But that was really helpful to me. And then just the verse of Galatians 6:9 that says, don't grow weary in doing good. Man, parenting is exhausting, but parenting a strong-willed little person is ultra exhausting. But I think it's so important to know what you guys were saying, that when you put that work in to an immature person and personality and heart, that God, through you, can shape that child to be such a strong influencer and leader and force, really, for his kingdom as that matures. Sometimes we just have to remember it's immature. It's going to be really good one day, but it's immature right now. Okay, if you're really struggling with a child, at what point should a parent go to counseling for help? At what point should you invite someone who is maybe a little more than a friend or your husband or kind of your go-to person? At what point should you seek help, maybe from a professional? Mandy?
I'm not a professional. I feel like I'm not an authority to speak on this, but in a way I am, because I'm a person and I have really needed help before. And if I were just talking to you in my group or face to face, I would say, if you are hurting, if you feel like you need help, then get help. And it is not going to be a bad thing. I have had times in my life and as a mom where I desperately wanted help, and I knew that I needed professional help, and I didn't. I made excuses. I didn't have time. I don't have, how do I pay for it? What would I do? And I regret that. I wish that I had. So I do see a counselor now, and she's great, and I can speak for it being a very positive, encouraging and challenging thing in my life. I was also telling Carrie that one of my best friends has been a counselor for a long time, and I asked her about this topic, and she just said, if you constantly feel overwhelmed, constantly anxious or angry, or if you even had trauma in your own life or in your own childhood, then they always say, get help, find a counselor. And I know you guys can probably speak to more ways like how to make that happen, how to find avenues, but that's what I would say.
Yeah, Emily, you got some thoughts?
Yeah, I just think any time that you're feeling really overwhelmed, anxious, like you said, and just feeling out of control, it's just really wise to make that step. And it can also just be a really good example to your kids, too, that seeking help is not a sign of weakness. It's courage. It's courageous, and it's you're acting in strength to know that I can't do this by myself. So I think it's always a good step.
Yeah, absolutely. I heard a quote that says, you will repeat what you don't repair. I thought, ooh, man, that's really good. You will repeat what you don't repair. So I would say if you have issues from your past, whether it's, your earlier adult years or your childhood or things that you feel like are affecting you today, go find somebody to help you process through some of those things, because the last thing you want to do is just repeat that cycle again. And maybe you don't repeat it exactly, but it's still having a negative impact on you and your family today. Go and get some help. Don't let Satan convince you, I got this, I can figure it out, or even I should be able to handle this, or I should be able to figure this out on my own. That's his lie to keep you just trapped in kind of the muck and the mire of that circumstance. And so put your pride aside, go to your husband, go to a friend, get somebody to help you. Now, I know that one hindrance to counseling a lot of times is the cost of it. And so if you're connected to fellowship in any way, we have a care team here of people who are trained in counseling to meet with you and to meet with you free of charge. And so if that's something that you ever need, or even if you know of a friend or someone else who needs that, give me a call the church, ask for somebody on our care team. They would love to help you, and they are golden. And so that's a great resource to know about as well. Okay, next question. How do you battle the peer pressure or cultural pace of what kids are doing and what they have access to at a younger and younger age? And so, in other words, how do you keep your kids age appropriate? This is tough. Emily?
Yeah, this is such a great question. I feel like my husband and I are continually having to revisit this. But one truth that really helps me is just knowing that because our family follows Christ, like, we're just going to look different from others. And so the book of 1 John and then John 13 through 15 talk a lot about what it looks like to love the world but not live like the world. And so I find a lot of comfort in that, just not being surprised when it happens. And then just trying to communicate with our trying to communicate with our kids that their classmates and their friends are most likely going to make choices that are just different than us, and help them be prepared ahead of time so that they're not surprised when that happens. And while we don't want to be self-righteous or in any way unloving towards others, just helping them be prepared for that tension that they'll probably feel. And then also, there are decisions that we make that if a lot of their classmates are watching a certain movie or something and talking a lot about it, we will let them watch that in order just to have easier conversations. You know, set them up well for those lunchtime conversations. But I'm usually in there with a pause button so that if there's a cultural message or something that I disagree with, that I feel like the Bible teaches differently, then we're able just to sit and talk about that. So this past summer, I let them watch a movie that was really just promoting the follow your heart. And I was like, we're going to pause that. And we talked about how, your heart is sinful and it is prone to feeling so many different emotions and feelings that if you based your actions on that advice, you're going to experience so much pain. You're most likely going to cause others to experience pain. And so it was just a really great discussion because they were able to walk down that path and with me and see that lie for what it was. And then ultimately, James 1:15 says, if any of you lack wisdom, go to God, he gives generously. And I just feel like the older my kids get, it's just continually asking God for wisdom because it is so hard.
Yeah, for sure. Mandy, what thoughts do you have with 5 and 7-year-old?
Well, kind of a lot of the same things Emily would say, definitely. We haven't gotten into the cell phone stage or anything like that. But I think, as she was saying, that the important thing right now is to teach them, first of all, to love where they are and to be content in the space of life where they are. You don't have to want all these other things because what you have is good, and let's really enjoy and be here. Also just getting together with your husband and your family, if you can get your mother-in-law and mom or whatever on board, to what are we going to pursue? What are our values? And not just, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do this, we're not, this is bad, but what are we going to pursue? and these things are good. These things, joy and, God's creation and family and all of these things are worth pursuing. And there's enough good things that we don't really have to pursue these other things. So I think those, all of that, and the same as what Emily said, if my boys want to watch, Ultimate Spider-Man because their cousin did, then okay, well, let's try it out. We're going to sit on the couch together, and I'm going to pause it. And you know what? Spider-Man's not being very kind to his friends right now. What do you think about that, guys? Or they also know that I'll just turn it off. We've done that multiple times. Nope, this is scary. We're done. And that's just, we talk about it beforehand. If mommy doesn't like this, or if I don't think it's appropriate, we're going to turn it off. And really empowering them to be discerning viewers, even when you're watching commercials or anything like that, letting them know that someone's trying to sell them something. What is this advertisement trying to say? You don't have to just accept the message that's coming to you. You can think around that. You can think outside of it.
Yeah, that's really good, because at some point you're not sitting there watching those things with your 5 and 7-year-old. You're sending your 15-year-old and your 17-year-old out to a friend's house, and so by doing that at that age, you're training them to make those decisions later. You're training them in wisdom and in discernment. The other thing that I think is really important is we live in this age of instant gratification. And so with your younger kids, but even with your older kids who may have cell phone or may have whatever access to technology, we, myself included, are trained to have an answer to any question right now because I can Google it. We're trained to, you need to buy something? Well, just jump on your phone and order it. We're trained to be able to do things instantly. And so I think it's really important that we teach our kids to wait, and that you have to intentionally do that. And you can do that when they're little. You can do that when they're in those middle ages, and you can do that when they're older, but teaching them to wait for things. Helping them to have room to progress, I think, is another important thing. And what I mean by that is when my oldest was about 10, she got invited to a birthday party of a friend from school. And here is what the day consisted of. A 10-year-old birthday party. The limousine picked them up from school, took them to Playtime Pizza for like 2 hours. Then they went and got ice cream somewhere, and then they did something else. And I was kind of like, okay, whoa. So what do you do when you turn 13? Like, how do you top that? And so I have a couple of friends who are really good at having, at this age, we get to do that. They have all girls, and she's like, at 13, you get to have your ears pierced, but you can only wear studs. At this age, you get to wear dangly earrings. At this age, you get to, and they've done an amazing job at giving their kids a place to progress and room to progress. And so I think that is another really important concept, because learning to wait for things here, just like we've said, learning to obey. When our kids learn to obey us, that sets them up to be able to obey God in the future. Learning to wait for things, for earthly material things, trains us to be able to learn to wait and be patient for God and His work in our lives. So I think that's really important. We're going to kind of move a little quicker here, but how do you get both parents on the same page in regards to parenting, discipline, all those fun things? Kimberly?
Yeah, that's not an easy thing. Just an idea to start with would, in terms of getting on the same page with your husband with parenting or disciplining, would be honestly just deciding together on a book to read together. And if you want to get 2 copies of it, and that's what you do on Monday and Wednesday nights, you lay in bed and read your book, and then afterwards, you discuss the next day or something, you discuss that chapter. That's such a good neutral place to begin the discussion, as opposed to talking about the discipline of little JoJo, because Mom, I didn't like the way you, Daddy, handled that, and that being the catalyst for your conversation, you're already starting off with him probably is going to be defensive, and you're on the offense. And so I think it's really wise to, of course, be selective in the book that you're choosing, a good, godly, author, and then let that be the catalyst for a good, healthy discussion between you and your husband. Or if it's available, and right now it's COVID, but a parenting conference, there are such things, good ones, family life, grace-based families, those things that have good parenting conferences. But then also, just something really practical. There are people in your life that are 1 or 2 seasons ahead of you. And Tad and I were desperately always looking for those people that we would look at and like, that's what we want. That's what we would like, what their family looks like. And so go to that couple and say, we'd love to go to dinner with you, or now maybe do a Zoom date or something like that. And we'd just love to talk to you about what's your philosophy on parenting and discipline. And then you get to hear that together, because they're not here with you in Bloom. And it's hard to go home from Bloom and just get them to understand the good thing that you heard and talked about in group. It's just difficult. So to get to do that together, and with a couple that you both decide upon, I think would be a great place to start.
Yeah. And so how do you do something like that? How do you say, hey, babe, let's read this book together? I mean, that doesn't, it's not a frequent conversation at our house to say, hey, would you read this book with me? But I think when you ask your husband for his input into an area, when you respectfully say, hey, we've been doing this book at Bloom. I would love for us to maybe read this, and I'd just love to know what you think. Like, giving him the opportunity to voice his thoughts on it in a respectful way, I think, is hugely important. It gives you a chance to, like Kimberly's saying, have a neutral, more, I guess, hypothetical conversation rather than a conversation about the situation that's actually happening, which is always really hard.
Yeah, I think humility, being prayerful and just having a posture of humility, like not, if we can just read this, then I can get him on board with what I'm thinking we need to be doing.
Yeah.
To really not have that posture,
yeah.
but to have a posture of we really want to be on the same page, and to share that with him. I really want to be on the same page. I don't want this to be a thing that's between us where that's an argument. I want us to be, we're a team.
Yeah, that's really good. Okay, we're going to move on to the last question because we're running out of time here. But
Can I say really quickly?
Yeah,
Chris
jump
really
in.
wanted me to say
Yeah.
that it's really helpful if you have a discipline situation and your husband is maybe fielding that one, or vice versa, to come behind and say, "Babe, you did a good job there. I know that was really hard. I'm really proud of you." Or just to give him that encouragement goes a long way.
That's a great point. Thanks for sticking that in. Last question. I struggle with anger as a mom. How do I handle this? This is one we've probably all dealt with. If you haven't, it's because, your baby was just born. Like yesterday, because even with a newborn, right? You're like, quit crying, go to sleep. So what do we do? Anger as a mom. Emily, get us started.
Yes, I definitely struggle with anger, and in moments when I just feel out of control or that I'm going to regret something that I'm going to say or do, I have to take a time out. And so I just communicate with my kids, I'm going to be in my room for a little while because I feel really out of control. I feel like I need to regain some self-control, and so I'm going to be in my room. And once in my room, I might cry, vent to the Lord, practice deep breathing, just try to get myself in a place where I'm physically feeling calmer. And then I try to analyze, am I angry because of legitimate disobedience from my child? Or is it because I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm feeling overwhelmed? And so if it's actual disobedience, then I need to calm myself down before I engage with my child. If it's my own issues, then I really need to dig deeper into what's going on. And so that could be, usually for me, here's vulnerability. I can get very high controlling, very just setting up unreasonable expectations for other people, my children, that they cannot meet. And so I have found that when I tend to be more controlling, it's usually because there's a deeper fear that I'm experiencing that I just have been ignoring. And so I usually have to take some time just to really be honest with myself and before the Lord, and the Holy Spirit, is usually like softening my heart and bringing to mind, what is going on. But I mean, it could take a day or so to process that. Not that you should stay in your room for a day or two, but that's, it's not always a quick process to see all those things that you're hiding deep in your heart and your mind. But I feel like the Holy Spirit is so gracious because he allows those situations to reveal that I'm more like my child than I care to admit. And so those moments when they're angry, I can then come to them and I can have compassion because I'm angry, like I've been angry, and I can identify with them in that instead of feeling self-righteous. Oh, how would, I can't imagine you throwing a tantrum about this. I threw tantrums. And so, and then something that has really helped give me a lot of freedom is just acknowledging that I don't always have to like my child, but I am called to love them. And so, despite what I feel, I'm called to love. But the feelings might take a while.
That's good. That's really good. Mandy, you said that your counselor told you that anger is a secondary emotion.
Yeah.
So explain that to us.
Yeah, well, I mean, as far as I can understand, I had said something about being angry. She was like, whoa, you weren't just angry. There's got to be something underneath. So just like Emily was saying, it's usually not just anger. It is, so, ask yourself, what's the root of that? Am I embarrassed by my kid? Is that why I'm angry? Am I hurt that they would possibly, do this to me even though they're 2 or whatever and they don't know? Am I just being inconvenienced? Or for me, is it my pride? So really, just like you teach them to identify their emotions, we need to be emotionally healthy enough to figure out what's going on in our own hearts.
Yeah, that's really good. I think that is really important to find that root, because I think a lot of times it's fear. Fear of what might happen if they don't obey, what they might turn into, what others might think of us. And so really identifying that root cause and that emotion. And then, Emily, kind of like you were saying, not to discipline when you're angry, because that's when we typically cross the line from disciplining our child in a loving way, and we cross over into just punishing them, right? Because we're angry and we want to take it out on somebody. And so I think just be willing to apologize to your kids. Model to them, hey, there's times that I mess up and I need your forgiveness, and I need Jesus, and this is why we need Jesus in our lives, because we sin, we get angry, we lose it, we're not perfect. And so just modeling that for your kids is super important. We've got to wrap it up. I appreciate you guys being here. I'm so thankful for the time and effort that you've put into this, but also into your families and your kids and your marriages, because I've seen that firsthand. So let's give them a hand. Let me pray for us, and then you guys run to your small groups. God, thank you for this time together, and we just thank you for your word and your wisdom and how your ways, your laws, your rules, your guidelines, they work, and they're practical and they're loving. And I just pray for each woman in this room that as she takes this material and she lives it out in her family, in her home day by day, that you would just give her courage to be that brick wall for the strong-willed child, courage to ask for forgiveness when we need it, courage to get on the same page with your husband. God, whatever it is that we need, would you give us the courage to follow you, to run after you, and to show that to our children. We love you and praise you and thank you for everything you've given us. In Jesus' name, amen.